It's Radio Free 501c, the podcast of Rogue Tulips Consulting. I'm your host, Cecilia Sept, and we're so excited to be back for Season 6 and continue bringing you outstanding ideas and thought leaders and different ways of thinking. So don't forget to subscribe because you're not going to want to miss any of it. This week, I'm joined by first-time guest Brian Scott. He's a technology expert, and he's here to share insights and to-dos for cybersecurity for associations. You don't want to miss this conversation. We want to thank USAE News for supporting this episode. They are the weekly newspaper of associations, CVBs, and hotels. You can learn more by checking out their website, usaenews.com. It's September 23rd, 2024. Welcome to episode 255. Hey, everybody, it's Monday, September 23rd, and that means it's time for another episode of Radio Free 501c brought to you by Rogue Tulips Consulting. I'm your host, Cecilia Sept. I'm a CAE and an ACNP, and I can't tell you how happy we are to have you with us this week for what's an important topic. As we're getting near the end of September, we're heading into fall and the holiday season, so we're focusing a little bit more on work. We need to think more about cybersecurity. There's a lot going on in the world. And if you've ever noticed the internet slowing down, a lot of times it's because there's increased cybercrime going on and there's lots of hacking slowing things down. My guest this week, Brian Scott, he's a first-time guest, which we always love to have, is here to talk with us about cybersecurity for associations and other types of nonprofits. But before we dive into our topic, I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to our global audience, wherever you may be. And again, thanks for joining us. And if you haven't yet subscribed or followed us, please take a moment to do that at your earliest convenience. So, Brian, welcome to the podcast. We've known each other for a while now. First-time guest, glad to have you here. Would you like to say hello to the audience and tell us a little about yourself?
Thank you so much. It's great to be on, and I think this is a great service that you're providing. I love the name Radio Free 501c. So a little bit about myself. So I'm a lifetime technologist. I was a geek as a little kid, and I kept with it. I call it the OG, the original geek, right? So I was educated in tech. I had a full career as a software developer and architect and a data architect, and that led into management. And then for the last 23 years now, I guess I've been operating at the C level, so CIO, CTO, and CISO. A lot of C names in there. A lot of people aren't really familiar what that is, but it's basically managing information technology or managing software development. That's CTO, or managing cybersecurity, and that's the CISO. And so one of my services to play off of your 501c is called 501 CISO, which is cybersecurity leadership for the nonprofit space.
Well, that's excellent because I know a lot of nonprofits think they can't afford cybersecurity and maybe they're not thinking about it. Hopefully they all have cybersecurity insurance. But when you and I were getting ready for this episode, you mentioned something about the cyber criminal industry. Could you tell our audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's kind of not only am I passionate and interested in cybersecurity, but I have a specific interest in cybercrime and the industrialization of cybercrime, because I find it's really an unprecedented global phenomenon that's going on right now. So I just find it fascinating. So I do a lot of reading around that. And if I ask a lot of folks that or potential customers that I might be talking to, is like, what do you think is driving an increase in cybercrime? They don't really know how to answer that. They're like, I don't know. Maybe I haven't even thought about that. Or maybe they think, I don't know, more people on computers. I don't know. But there's an industrialization that's going on in global cybercrime. And what does it mean to industrialize something? It means that when you industrialize an industry, it means you start to have specialization. Some companies just do this, and some companies do this. And then you get a supply chain kind of infrastructure where there are specialized groups. Costs come down, more entry to barrier. It gets a lot easier to come in, so entry to barrier lowers, right? And that's what's going on on a global scale on the crime side. And so let me give a couple examples of what I mean by that. So it used to be to run, say, a phishing campaign. Well, someone had to be smart enough to know, well, I'm going to have to send out a lot of emails. I'm going to have to set up some email marketing engines, or utilize, illegally some other ones. I'm going to have to get a bunch of names that I'm going to want to draw that. And so there's a bunch of tech involved in that. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. Now there is phishing as a service. There are just groups out there that are phishing as a service groups. And they also have partner groups that can sell you lists of names that have been compromised. So you don't even have to come up with that. And it's very inexpensive. It might be a couple $100 to send out a phishing, program, a campaign, if you will. Right? It's amazing. Another one that's even more high tech is ransomware as a service. So ransomware is very high tech software, right? It really operates at the kernel level of your, of your operating system. I mean, it's really high tech thing. Well, what cyber criminals that were of that high tech caliber, what they realized is like, well, we can build these malware tools, ransomware, and we like doing that. They're techie people. Like, we like building the tools. We don't like having to do all the work of trying to deploy it and then the extortion of people and trying to deal with the money. That's like business side. We don't like to do that. Well, why don't we just set up a business where we just lease our malware? Well, that's ransomware as a service. So now, all of the tens of thousands of cyber criminals across the world that don't have that level of technology to know how to do that, they can still deploy that software. They just license it, just like you license Microsoft, just like you license Adobe. They just get ransomware as a license and deploy it. I mean, it's really unbelievable. And so,
wow.
In the end, what is that? I know, isn't it? It's astounding, right? So in the end, what you have is you have countries where maybe the average annual income might be $6,000 or $7,000 a year or $5,000 a year. Someone who dedicates themselves into this after a year of running it and really getting into understanding these software as a service capabilities, they can make $30,000 and $40,000 a year pretty easily. And so you get a lot of people drawn to it from that, right? So, and the internet has obviously become almost ubiquitous across the planet. Everyone has access to it. A lot of these countries, there's a lot of need for money. So there's thousands of people pouring into it. And it's going to keep our crime level really, really high and active for many years to come. So that's why cybercrime is continually to grow.
Well, that is, people who know me know I am not often at a lack for words or a loss for words. That leaves me a little speechless.
Yeah.
Because I am a person who tries to keep up with this stuff. I know it's out there. I try to be really cautious, but I had no idea it had become that specialized, that industrialized, to where it's almost like a real, well, I guess it is a real business. We have always had organized crime in some way. So, if you think back to American history, the gangs of the 1930s, there was something called Murder Incorporated. And basically, you bought their service if you want somebody killed.
That's right.
So this is really, and you're right. I think poverty drives this a lot. I need money. I can make money quick. Why not? And maybe people feel they're getting something they deserve because they have not had access to the economy. But this is why everything you just said, Brian, this is why I'm super suspicious of any email I get now. If I get an email, even from a company that I do business with, I don't click through the message. I go to my account online. Unless it's WebRoot, because WebRoot, I'm still mad at you about your customer service. But anyway,
right. Well, that is absolutely the right approach. And I'm glad you brought that up because 85, depending on what stat you look, between 85 and 90% of all compromises today that are occurring primarily through phishing emails. Still, it is the primary vector. And why is that? A couple of reasons. One is it's very cheap to do. It's very easy to send out emails with links in it, right? That's very easy. And so that's what this whole phishing as a service industry is around. But then, unfortunately, far too many people, too many organizations, and organizations at the leadership level, including associations, have not embraced that cybersecurity and a cybersecurity building and a cybersecurity awareness culture within your company is the responsibility of the executives. And they have to build the culture because as a worker in today's world, on computers, remote from home, all of that, we all shoulder a responsibility of cybersecurity for our organization. But the first step to that is understand that it's there, that we have to do that. And so I think, so what does having a cybersecurity culture really mean? It means talking about it. It means having a testing our staff and training them and testing them. And do you understand how to identify phishing emails? Having a goal, a corporate goal a company goal of saying, hey, we want to have less than 5% of our people clicking, on a monthly basis or something. You have some kind of goal, and drive towards that. Even a scarier stat than the fact that today the national average for folks failing phishing or clicking on phishing emails is around 20%. That's very high. 1 in 5 people are going to do it still. Scarier than that, of the 1 in 5 that click, of those that click on it, if they go to a website that's proposing for a credential, and this is credential stealing, right? Where they're saying, hey, we're your tech group from Microsoft, and we need you to log in here to confirm something. So you put in your account. Well, you're just giving your account credentials over. Of the 1 in 5 that click the phishing, between 45 and 50% of them will actually go all the way through and give their credentials away. So is it any wonder that there's a lot of phishing and a lot of credential stealing, and therefore a lot of malware and a lot of other things that are going on because the credentials are given?
That is amazing to me, because if we live in a technology-driven world, a digital world, a virtual world where so many things are online, I would think people would be a little more cautious, especially with the need for groups like LifeLock. Like, I have LifeLock for all my accounts. I also have all the notifications set up on all my other accounts, like credit cards, bank accounts, etc. So I'm getting multiple information about what's going on. And there's some really simple things I think people can do. Like, if you get a phishing email, read the actual email address that's coming from and see if it's a real email address. I've actually gotten phishing emails claiming to be Microsoft or Amazon from something like bob@gmail.com. And it's like, yeah, sure, bob@gmail.com. So there
Yeah.
are some simple things, but the thing, like I've already mentioned, the habit I've gotten in, even if it's a company I do business with, I go to my online account. I don't click through. For that reason,
No.
I actually have a funny example. I've had an American Express account for many years now. And earlier this year, they sent me an email about something called Safe Pass, where they would from time to time send me a notification to make sure it was really me. And I didn't believe it. I thought it was a scam, and I deleted it. I went to the website and they're like, oh yeah, we're starting this new program.
Yeah.
But this, I'm from
Right.
Missouri. I'm a born skeptic. So that is my approach. I'm skeptical in today's world. But another thing I want to bring up, Brian, you talked a lot about phishing emails. There's also phishing text. So what are some things people can do to be aware of phishing text?
Yeah, and in fact, there's probably around 30 different types of phishing. They have these silly, kind of funny different names. Phishing text is called mishing, with SMS for being text.
Okay.
Smishing, right? That's called smishing. You can get QR codes now in emails, and it's just like, hey, you won something. Click this QR code. That's
Okay.
called quishing.
Wishing. Oh, I love it.
In a phone
It's so
call, like
weird.
just spam phone calls that are trying to get you to do things and provide them information and maybe even go somewhere, they'll tell you, yeah, just go to this website. That's called vishing, which is voice. So
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Wow.
so there's all these interesting names with that. And so to answer your question about texting is on the rise. Text phishing or smishing is definitely on the rise now. As awareness of phishing emails starts to rise and it gets a little bit tougher, it's still pretty low, but it is going up slowly. They're going to try these different channels, right? Whatever channel is out there, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper through these as a service companies to do things like texting, right? There's not somebody in a basement that's literally somehow got a number and they're trying to do it. It's all automated. Everything is through these systems and it's all automated. And so, and that's happening. But basically, you come to these things, all of them, phone calls, text messages, emails, from the same perspective, which is you start with, this is not real and this is someone trying to scam me. That's where you start. always, until you can prove to yourself that it's like, oh, actually, no, I guess this is real, right? You start there and get to the real. Most people, unfortunately, start in the other place. They just accept everything's real coming in unless they happen upon some little clue and they're like, oh, wait a minute, might this be, deleterious or, a scam? So they got to flip their mindset,
Right.
right? Everything has to be that way. And one of the reasons you have to do that is for another type of phishing is called spear phishing. Spear
Oh,
phishing is targeted phishing.
okay.
The reason I want to bring this up is because this is why associations are targeted.
Okay.
What is one thing that associations typically always have? Lists of people, right? Members, right? And often in a industry segment or an industry vertical or some kind of focused area, right? And those people are, it can be across the board, everyone that operates, but there's a lot of business leaders, CFOs, C-level people that are in those lists, heads of departments of finance and things like that. So that's valuable information. And so a lot of what will happen with fishers now is they'll get a list from say, hey, we have the head, the CFO, the CEO, and the president of this company. The company is called whatever, it's just called widget.com. Widget. So with WI, say D, right? Well, then go look and they say, look, WIID, JET, is available as a domain. They'll buy the domain with two I's in it. They know that the CEO's name. They'll send an email from that CEO with the WIID widget to people, and they'll try to scam them that way. That's called spear phishing, right? So where they're posing as people, and so that's the number. That's the most effective phishing that's out there. So if you get an email and you come at it with this might be this is probably fake first, and you look at your CEO, your fake CEO is asking you to do something. If you're skeptical first, you think, well, wait a minute, is this normal for them to ask me this in an email? Is this something I normally get for them? Is it the tone that my CEO would use with me? Is it the right organizational logo that we have right in our, or the signature block? All of those things first. You should start there first. And if there's any clues, then you can reach out through some other manner back right to the CEO and say, did you just send me that email on that? Because things look a little different. And so you got to come at it with that skepticism.
Yeah, act like you're from Missouri.
Yeah, that's right.
This stuff. That's really, gosh, that's so interesting. And I have seen things like that. Brian, you and I are both ASAE members. We're both in the consultant community. And earlier this year, you might recall there were several of us sharing stories about getting fake RFPs
Yep,
that looked
I
really
got
legit.
that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so we all are smart and savvy enough to know, hey, wait a minute. I've never even heard of this group. Or what I was doing was sending messages to the people that supposedly sent it, and they were real people at those groups like you just described, and I never would hear back from them, probably because they thought, well, she's crazy, I never sent her an RFP. So even with that, and of course I remember somebody in the community said, why would they pick on us poor consultants like this? It's just cruel, giving us that
They'll pick
opportunity.
on anyone and everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, just if they can get access to your information and get your money
Yeah.
or use your credentials, they're going to do it. And it's why it's really important to have these conversations. Now, some of the other things that you have mentioned to me is that a lot of the small, not just small businesses, but small associations and maybe even medium-sized associations kind of act like an ostrich and put their head in the sand, and they don't think about this. So what are some dangers of that, and what are some things we could do to convince them to think differently?
Yeah, that's a really important question, I think, because for one thing, cybersecurity is a complex workspace, right? A mind space. And so if you're not a professional on that, of course, I wouldn't expect you to know a lot about it. But so it gets a little scary, and it's this little black box thing. And so that is one leading contributing factor, I think, to that. The other is that the as I mentioned, the cybersecurity industry has left the SMB world, the small and medium-sized organization world behind. They're looking for the $40,000, $50,000 assessment client and everything. So a lot of them haven't created good, solid support service products for the SMB. And so there are those like me, and some others that have, right? It's because you got to fit it to the organization, so it makes sense. And so they might just think it's too expensive. I'm just not going to deal with it. And then lastly, another thing that's really common in the association and nonprofit space is that a lot of associations have MSPs, managed service providers, right? They're the ones managing their devices and their equipment and their cloud accounts, and they're the tech companies. And they think, well, they've got it. I've got the tech company, and they've got it. Many tech companies do, and they do a pretty good job, but unfortunately, not all of them do a great job, right? And I understand it's a difficult job to do. They have lots of clients, they have margin that they're trying to hit, and there's lots of competing factors there of why an MSP may not do a great job. But let's look at the way that, and this is where the industry is headed. Let's look at what goes on in accounting. You have your in-house accountants. You might even have an outsourced accountant helping you with certain things, right? But then there's an audit process for a lot of organizations, right? Those auditors are different than your in-house and your house's account. They're objective. They're separate for a reason, because they're not the ones having to do the work. They're just making sure that the work is being done correctly. The same thing really needs to occur for your technology and your security space, whether it's your MSP. You need to have, I think a wise organization would have a third party that watches over that and makes sure that it's being done correctly. And I tell you what, I love MSPs. I feel for them because it's really hard business to be in, great relationships with them. I've rarely found an MSP that's doing everything that they should be doing for an organization, right? Because there's so much going on and they get distracted with things, right? And so I think that would be part of it, is you can't trust just a single vendor to do everything for you. You need to have good counsel around to make sure that you're getting what you should from your MSP.
And make sure they're doing that. I know as a solopreneur, I do have some virus software in place and other things I've mentioned, like LifeLock and WebRoot. And then of course, you always have your Windows firewall on. And I do rely on my MSPs to make sure they're protecting all their clients. But you're absolutely right. There's going to be a hole in the grid that somebody can sneak through, because you can't think of everything. You can't cover everything. But I think that's a really great point, that people need to actually ask about that. Ask their MSPs, what are you doing to protect our website? Because I really can't think of any association, and I'm not saying there isn't one out there, but I can't think of one who is built and houses their own website in their office. Like, they're almost always through a company. Like Squarespace or somebody like that, or maybe it's part of their AMS system. But all that data in the AMS, speaking of AMSs, that needs to be protected. It's not just names and addresses. It's going to be payment information. It's going to be birthdays, things like that. All that kind of information somebody could steal your identity with, and that's really what happens a lot. People, they steal your identity. And I think you're so knowledgeable about this. Is all of this happening on the dark web, where they're getting this information and finding each other for these special ransomware?
Yeah, and so the industry operates on the dark web. And what is the dark web? For a lot of people, they may have heard about it, but interestingly, as big as the world of Google is, right? When you go out and you can Google, and there's just millions and millions of sites, that's a fraction of all of what's actually available. And the larger part of what's available is you can't get to through a regular browser, right? There's special browsers called Tor browsers that kind of anonymize to some degree, who the individual is and working it. And all of these illegal platforms that I was mentioning, the as a service platforms, ransomware, phishing, and access brokers, they all operate out there. And so It's not difficult, you have to know how to do it, but it's pretty easy to get one of these Tor browsers and just start working yourself into these things. But that's where it's happened. So when you hear that there was a ransomware attack or a data extraction, and that now 57 million people's information is available, that's out on the dark web, and people are selling that stuff. It's interesting that you mentioned the old gangsters, because it's extortion. It's just plain old extortion. It's a game that's been around for a long time. We're going to come in, we're going to take your information, we're going to let you know that we have it, we're going to put a little bit out there and say, look, are these your people or not? We're going to encrypt or make it unavailable to you, your information. So now you can't operate. If you want it back, you have to pay us money. And if you don't pay us money soon enough, we're going to release it all out there. Now, an association should ask themselves this: how are we going to fare with our membership group if we've lost all of their information out, and it's out on the dark web, and it was our channel, if we were the channel for that? The reputational hit on that is pretty significant, right? Pretty significant. And so that's what we want to protect against. One other thing I wanted to comment, if you don't mind, about MSPs. There's two aspects. You said things that we should ask questions about. I love that you said that, because groups should ask more questions about how are we being protected? What are you doing? Here's a great question. How do I know that what you're doing is everything that should be done and is enough? That's a great question. How are they going to respond to that, right? But there's another dimension to that, because all of these groups, MSPs, they actually have all of these very powerful admin accounts into your cloud, if you have on-prem stuff, right, into your organization stuff. What is that MSP doing for their own security, right? How can you prove to me, MSP, that you're leading the way, you're doing the best practice everywhere? How can you prove that? In my opinion, the answer to that should be, because we are audited from a third party every year. Let us give you your report, and it should give you an objective view that we're doing what we should do. Not all of them can say that. Not all of them are doing that. And so if they're supposed to be in charge of your own security, and yet they're not doing their own and having a third party, how can you really trust that?
That's a great point, because I really don't think, to what you said earlier about associations just really aren't thinking about it, and we need to think about it. Nobody wants to think about the worst possible scenario. They don't want to think it'll happen to them. Well, I've had a good life, don't get me wrong, but I've had things happen. So I know, yeah, it could happen to me. I could be the one who gets their money stolen. I could be the one whose identity is damaged, or reputation is damaged, I should say, from identity theft. We need to think about that. So ransomware is something that does happen to associations. I've actually heard of several cases of associations having their website shut down for ransomware. And even another solopreneur I know years ago had their website attacked by ransomware, and the company was trying to get their website back for them. But that leads us to the question of cybersecurity insurance, because you can't do anything about the ransomware, except if you have all of your stuff backed up consistently. Like I back everything up on Carbonite, for example. You have it backed up somewhere, and you can just say, well, F you, extortionist cyber criminal, I'll just download all my data on a new computer.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, suck it.
Yeah, right.
Suck it, cyber criminals.
Right.
Oh, that's just an invitation for me now to get raided. But anyway, but seriously, when we're looking at ransomware and those kind of things, what should people ask about cybersecurity insurance? Like, as far as what will cybersecurity insurance do for them in that kind of situation?
Yeah. I think, it gets confusing. There's a lot of categories and a lot of numbers thrown out there. And, and most of the time you're like, what does that really do? I think one thing is, for your broker, is just to ask for real world examples. Just say, okay, so we get hit with ransomware. What happens? How does this really kick in? If if our data gets exfiltrated and shared out on the dark web, how does that play in? So you can go through some of these use cases that people read about and hear about, and have them explain it in that way. So that's one good thing. The other good thing is that there's the financial side of the policy, which might be, oh, we'll cover this amount of money for certain signs of loss. The other side is help with incident response and management, and a lot of policies out there bring that to the table, and a lot of folks don't realize that if you have a policy that includes incident response and maybe incident response support, um, as soon as you have an incident, you call your agent. They have a cybersecurity team vendor that they work with, that they've contracted with, and they'll get them involved to help work through that issue. That's a great aspect. So that's not just a coverage aspect. That's a really, hands in the pie trying to fix, what's going on there. So you can see, does it include that? Some do, some don't. But that's a good one to have.
And that's really important. We have to ask what the insurance is actually going to do at any level of insurance, but especially with cybersecurity, because all life now is online. You have to have apps. You have to have a smartphone to do a lot of things. You have to fill out all your forms online. That's always dangerous. It's one of the reasons, like when I'm filling out an online medical appointment form, I do not upload an image of my health insurance card. And fortunately, most of them don't require that. You can show it to them at the office. But just avoid things like that. Just it's easy to build these habits, is what I'd like to encourage people to know. And with staff at associations or other nonprofits, just teach them not to click through on something. Teach them to ask themselves some questions, use some analytical and critical thinking skills. Is this a real email? Should I click on this or should I not click on it, as the case may be? So those are really good tips as well. So, and one other thing before we wrap up, this has been really fun conversation, Brian. You've actually really expanded my glossary of cybercrime with all these
Excellent.
terms, which I love. But when it comes to ransomware, federal law says you are not ever to pay ransom for anything, and that includes ransomware situations. So if they say, give us $5,000 and we'll give you your website back. First of all, somebody else has told me, who does the kind of work you do, they don't always give you your website back. They may have already deleted it, but they'll take your money anyway. So, they're criminals. They're not going to follow through. So do you know, from your experience, do you see a lot of people that actually pay the ransomware and get their information back, or is it the opposite?
So luckily I don't, because, and there is the risk that you're not going to get it back anyway. Now, I think probably the majority, and I don't know, having a hard stat on that, the majority of criminals would actually would give you the keys to unencrypt, your files or whatever it is, your website, so that you can get it back, because they want that news out there so that other people will pay, right? Because if if enough goes on, it's going to, people won't pay at all. So I think they're decent about that. What I see is that it comes down to recoverability, this is a big part, again, about understanding where you are with your MSP, with your in-house staff, whatever it is about recoverability. That's the last stage of these 5 stages of dealing with an incident. And if you've got really good backups and they're protected and they're not affected by the ransomware, because sometimes the ransomware can wipe out your backups, then if you can recover, then you don't have to pay. Then you just get rid of it, you recover, and you're good to go. Everyone who can recover never pays. The only groups that when you hear about them paying, you know exactly what was wrong. They didn't have the right kind of backups, or their backups weren't protected, and the encryption actually affected those too. Then for hospitals and things like that you have patient care data, they have no choice, but they feel like that they have to pay to try to get it back. So it's a tough situation.
Wow, that is a tough one. But hopefully all of your great advice and insights are going to help people not be in this situation, or at least have those backups in place. So Brian, it's been great having you on. I look forward to having you back in the future if you're interested in coming back.
Absolutely. We love it. And I'd love to come back, as a whole nother part of our business that I deal with, or my business is automation tools, low code, no code automation tools that can revolutionize the business. That's very exciting as well. So I kind of keep a foot in both of these areas, one there and one in cybersecurity.
Oh, that's excellent. So, well, Brian, before we wrap up, I always like to ask my guests, what is the one thought you would like the audience to take away today? And how can they get in touch with you if they'd like to learn more?
Yeah. The one thought is that you can do something that makes your risk, that lowers your risk. It is possible. It's not super expensive all the time. It can be reasonably priced and it improves your position. You just have to know what it is. So, and there's plenty out there to do it. So, engage with your MSP vendor, engage with a third party model, whatever it is, just engage with someone around the topic and figure out what's next to do. So that's the easy thing. To get in contact with me is through email. Is great. And that can be Brian with an I, Brian, Scott, at cleartoneconsulting.com. That's my consulting company. I also have 501CISO.com, Brian Scott at 501CISO.com, and that's my cybersecurity service specifically. And both of those are websites that you can check out as well.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you again. It's always great to have somebody who really knows this kind of topic and can calm the waters, so to speak. So people know it might seem formidable, but you can deal with it.
Yes, I agree. It can be dealt with for sure.
Yes, great. Well,
thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you. It's been a great conversation. And I always love having first time guests because one of our goals is feature voices that maybe aren't being heard as often as others. So, and we always are finding gems of information like you shared today. So we have to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next time with another exciting episode. So again, gentle reminder, if you have not yet followed or subscribed, please do on your favorite podcast service. If you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips Consulting and how we can help your organization bloom outside the box and see things differently, check out our website, roguetulips.com. I'm always up for a conversation if you'd like to try to talk and see if we can work together. If I'm not the right person, I'll send you in the right direction. If you are getting ready to get the CAE and sit for the exam, we also have a Rogue Tulips education program. We have study groups and courses, and we, of course, have our famous ethics course that we offer every month. And it sounds to me like the ethics course is something that these cyber criminals need to take so that they act like better people, part of society. Right. So, but check out our education program at our education page, and don't miss our weekly blog where I comment on issues of the day. So we are going to sign off for now. On behalf of Brian and myself, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.